I am here with Mark Warren, Executive Vice President of Strategos, and thank you for joining us on Facebook Live today. Mark, thank you for being here.
Oh, I love being here with you, Roy. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we have an awesome topic today, and that is bulletproof backpacks, bulletin boards, and panic buttons. Do they make schools more secure, or are they merely expensive distractions? And for everyone watching, we appreciate you joining us. We would love your comments, your questions, and if this information is beneficial to you, we would be grateful if you would share it. Well, Mark, let's jump right in. School shootings of all things, of all kinds of crimes, really make us desperate to do anything we can to see them stopped. And several products have been introduced since the Florida shooting and other shootings, and many millions of dollars of products have sold. But we want to make sure that the ideas that are introduced are really going to actually make students and schools safer. One of these products, probably the preeminent one, is Bulletproof backpacks. Can you tell us a little bit about them, and are these something that can actually save lives, or are they really taking us off task?
You know, it's a great question, Roy. And every time one of these incidents happens, we're looking for a single solution to a complex problem. And the reality is the backpack is only one portion. Could it make it safer for a child? Oh, it could. It could. But is it probably going to be the thing that necessarily saves their life more likely than anything else? I don't think so. On one side, I've carried a ballistic panel in my backpack for years. Everywhere I travel, when I go to another country, when I travel on an airplane, every single day, I've got a ballistic panel. But do I rely on it to save my life? No, first and foremost is awareness. I just have to be aware of what's going on around me. Some of the problems with this concept is, one, typically they are a ballistic panel that will not stop rifle rounds. But now statistically, when you look and review these shootings, a rifle is not generally the weapon of choice. It's usually a handgun. So the ballistic panels will stop a handgun, but then you look at the idea of when and how is the backpack deployed. It's typically on the back. Well, am I facing the threat, or am I facing away from the threat? If I'm trying to get away from the threat, then it could provide me some ballistic protection if the threat is using a handgun. So it doesn't protect both sides, which is kind of a flaw. Will they have it on them when many of our kids that are in school don't keep their backpacks with them, or it is, but it's not readily available. Maybe it's stored someplace else. So all of those things can be a problem. And then in order to get to the point that it stops rifle rounds, you have to do that in several different ways. One, you either have to use a ceramic plate, which is thicker and bulkier, or you have to use some very, very high-tech materials or steel. If you use the high-tech materials, very, very cost prohibitive. If you use the steel, very heavy. So each one of those creates a plus and a minus that you have to determine whether or not it's going to be beneficial. If I had a parent that was looking at doing something to try to keep their child safer, I would tell them you're better off to invest in a purpose-built barricade device for your child's teacher's classroom, where they could lock down more quicker and more securely.
Can you give us an example? What would be a purpose-built barricade device for a classroom?
There's a lot of different ones out there. We typically recommend the Barracuda. We've used that one for quite a while. It's a very fast deployed device. It uses gross motor skills. You have to have it for one type of door or another, whether the door swings in or the door swings out. But they're very cost effective. You're usually looking at about $159 for a device. There are other devices out there as well. That's just the one that we have chosen to back, because when we first really started looking at devices, it was one of the first ones out there, and we knew the inventor and kind of worked with him in different ways. So the main thing would be anytime that you can create a lockdown that is more secure quicker, that also allows that classroom teacher to conduct other things and direct students in other ways on things that need to be done, emergency tasks that need to be done.
Well, and what you told me just then about the Barracuda device, I think, did you say about $160?
Correct.
That costs less than the backpacks that I
The
saw.
backpacks, yes.
They were $200 to $500.
Correct. And the big factor on the backpacks, is the additional cost getting you more ballistic protection or not? Is it just a nicer bag? What size panel? And even when you look at the ballistic panels, there are various grades of those. Typically, a regular police officer in his concealable body armor is wearing a 3A, which will stop everything up to a 44 Magnum. Some of them may be putting a class 2 panel in that may not be capable of stopping even some of the handgun rounds. So there's a lot of factors that can really determine cost and other conditions.
The backpack, it's not going to do any harm, but we have to have reasonable expectations that, our child or our student is safe now that they're at school. Mark,
right.
Another solution that has been proposed that actually I believe it was the University of Maryland spent a significant amount of money on, is bulletproof whiteboards for classrooms. Now, this isn't just a whiteboard that is stuck to the wall. Obviously, that wouldn't make any sense. It's meant to be used as a shield. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that an effective solution for schools, or part of one?
They spent $60,000. Now it was funded privately and everything else, but the reality for me is $60,000 could be spent in a lot of different ways to enhance the security level of the school. So typically, over my right shoulder is a ballistic whiteboard. We've had this one for a long time. We got it to test out to learn more about them. And this was probably the late 2000s, or I'm sorry, probably 2010 timeframe when we got this one. So technology, again, has improved. But it goes back to just like the ballistic panels in the backpack. It depends on what materials they're using to make them. Is it rated to stop rifle rounds or handgun rounds? The one behind me is made out of AR-500 steel, which should stop a rifle round, but it's heavier than a typical ballistic panel used by police officers. So how am I going to wield it? Now, the problem for me is being heavy. The way that the handles are made, it tends to make me hold it horizontal, just like it is behind me, instead of up and down vertically where it might cover more of my body. Also, what am I supposed to do? I'm just basically catching the bullets. Now, what do I do in order to remove myself or to either take it to the next level to finally stop this shooter? Both of my hands are tied onto this heavy, unwieldy panel that's in front of me. So how do I deploy it? Do I cover my door with it? Well, why am I standing in front of my door anyway? It's a fire core rated door. Rounds can come through it. I should be to my safe wall rather than in front of that door and my door is barricaded. Am I going to carry this 30-pound device down the hallway with me? So for me, the deployment aspect of it really doesn't make sense, because with the University of Maryland, I really don't know how they intend to deploy them. I know one of the articles that we referenced, that you and I had discussed, it was a smaller panel, so it was a lot smaller, but again, it covers my center chest, and that's great. I'm catching bullets, I'm stopping bullets, but now what do I do about it? And so it could be a useful tool, but how are they deploying it? What is their plan for deployment? What training are they providing those people that they plan on using them? Here's a ballistic panel. Okay, now you don't know how to use it, and then you get involved in a shooting. Now that's when you're going to learn. So without knowing that part of it, I really don't know. Again, could it save a life? Sure. But there's going to be a lot more factors and a lot more things that we could be doing that make better sense and better use of that money spent. If we've covered a lot more other areas that have raised the level of security in our environment, and we're still looking for other little advantages, okay, now I might be looking at something like that. But if I haven't filled those other gaps, the last thing I would be spending my money on is a ballistic whiteboard.
Well, I think I'm picking up on a little bit of a theme here, is that secure schools aren't going to come as a result of a gadget or two, but as a comprehensive strategy. Sophisticated, complex problems aren't going to be solved by one tool. Another approach that's being used now, this isn't a bullet stopping device. This is another approach, is that schools have begun putting in fire alarm type active shooter panic buttons. So they're mounted to the wall, and then some selected teachers have a key fob, and what it does is automatically calls the police. The police know what the threat is. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How much confidence should schools put in something like that?
Correct. So at least on this level, I have a lot more faith, and I can justify the expense more readily for a device, or let's say a key fob that teachers can wear on their wrist, around their neck, that gives them the ability to activate that panic system from wherever they find themselves, being a wireless device. And the reason that I can is it's because it's part of the notification system. If I make it part of the notification system, in other words, not just that it goes to 911 and activates 911. Yeah, the police are coming, but guess what? Somebody's already on their phone calling 911. So it's not so much that I want it to do that. What I do want it to do is notify school-wide, so that I have a special alarm system that also is tied into that. So it's not your normal bells, it's not your normal sirens, whatever the case may be. We recommend a very distinct audible alarm, followed also by a distinct lit alarm, like an LED strobing light of a specific color that only will be activated should that alarm be activated. And that panic button, at that point, now I can justify the cost, because now everybody is now aware that there is a potential threat in the building, and we are responding to that threat. If the panic alarm is only tied to the police department, it really does the rest of us in the school any real service. So there are a lot of pros and cons to any device that we look at, but for me, the panic button system, especially when it can be tied to our electronic fire doors. So those fire doors can be kept locked and open, magnetically held open, but when that panic alarm is activated, it releases those doors. And what that does is it's creating compartmentalization of the school to prevent access from the threat. He'll be able to move one way through those fire doors, but he can't return. And so it really starts limiting their movement. And this is a huge area that I think schools need to be doing, so that we're aware that he is a threat inside of our school. We want to compartmentalize the rest of the school. In other words, limit the number of victims that he has access to. Now, the first layer of compartmentalization is the classroom. That's why we recommend teach with your door closed and locked. You're already compartmentalized. Now, what's the greatest threat to them? If the threat starts in their classroom, but now he's limited to 30 victims instead of 400 victims. So the panic buttons, I did an assessment, a physical security assessment for a school in northern Michigan. And honestly, it was probably one of the better prepared schools that I'd ever seen. And this is one of the features that they had based on previous recommendations from our instructors. So they had the strobing lights. They were a blue light. They even went so far as to talk to, because they were somewhat remote, but they did talk to the business across the street and notify them, if you see this blue strobing light activated on the outside of our building, that means we have a possible intruder in our building, and some of our students may be coming to your business and you need to lock them down. So it was very good preparation on their part and how that system was going to be used.
Yeah, so it sounds like the bottom line is the alert. If the alert is only tied to calling the police, that's somewhat helpful. But based on statistics, you're going to have 3 to 10 minutes of someone still shooting up the building, even though the police are on their way. If the device, however, notifies everyone to take action, that makes it worthwhile.
Correct. Now, there are other systems out there that aren't the wireless panic button. A lot of these programs have apps that can be placed on your phone as another means to activate that panic button. One of the problems that I see with those, though, is I have to go through several layers on my phone to get to the app, to then finally push the button for that panic system to be kicked in. And so that delay gives the intruder more time to carry out part of his attack before people are properly notified. So it's still another layer. And again, I am all about creating as many redundant layers as possible. So even if I had the wireless panic buttons, I would still like to have some type of a phone app system in place to again have as many forms of communication as possible. Now, some of the downsides would be, and why I like the wireless panic button, whereas the phone, many teachers, their phone is on their desk in the drawer. It's not physically on them while they're in front of the class teaching. And so again, they would have to go get their phone if they have time and opportunity, access that app, and then activate the panic system. Whereas that wireless button can be on them at all times. But there's so many things that they don't think about as far as keys. If part of my plan is to use that panic button, it's got to be on me. It's no different that as part of my plan is I've got to go lock my door, and that's part of my plan. Where are my keys? That's why we recommend doors should be locked at all times and closed while you're teaching. But even if it's open and locked, I still have to go pull it closed. Where is it? Where am I in relation to that door when I now need to implement that part of the plan? And sometimes they don't see time in the same way when it comes to that and recognize the value of time in a crisis. We're talking about seconds instead of minutes.
Whenever something like this happens, state lawmakers, federal lawmakers, they want to respond. And so billions of dollars have been proposed. And, if I'm a school administrator, I don't want to miss out on money. But as we've talked about, these solutions or these proposals are very expensive. Some of them are of dubious effectiveness. How can administrators, teachers, and even parents help to direct their school districts to put the resources to a place where they're really actually going to save lives?
Right. I have to admit, I get somewhat cynical when it comes to a lot of these solutions, simply because I say it all the time. When a politician tries to solve one problem, they create 5 more for somebody else. And these situations cannot be decided and controlled or a solution provided from your state capital or from the national capital. They're too far away from the problem. They've got to be provided and solved locally. And so that's where my cynicism comes in, because who's their subject matter expert? Sometimes I hear some of the solutions they're coming up with, and I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Well, take as an example, after Sandy Hook, we had 2 extreme arguments: ban all guns and have an armed police officer in every single school. Well, I can show you that neither one is the solution. Columbine had a police officer present. It still was carried out. And how many other incidents have we had school resource officers assigned to the schools, and they still occur? It doesn't stop them from occurring. But on the other side, you can say ban all guns, but the reality is it's never going to happen. So the answer's got to be somewhere in the middle. So first and foremost, when you look at these things, what are some of the solutions that we need to be looking at? One, it's got to start organically, locally. What are you willing to do in your community to keep your children safe? And some people just don't get that, because I cannot give my security away to somebody else and think that they're going to care more than me about it. So first, it's got to start organically, locally. And what are you willing to do to keep your kids safe? Now, what can the school be doing? First and foremost, they need a good physical security assessment done by a competent assessor. So first and foremost, they need to vet anyone that they're looking at having the capability of doing the assessment. To be quite honest, there's a lot of these things popping up all over, because unfortunately, this whole area is becoming, it's growing. There's a lot of money to be made in this field, unfortunately, and I don't like to do that. It's what we've done for years, and it's just kind of grown into it. But you have to know who's doing your assessment, and what is their background. Just because I was a retired police officer doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at an assessment. What have I been trained to do? How do I look at it? We can look at it from the standpoint of you need more lighting in your parking lot. You need to cut these shrubs back so that we have clearer lines of vision, but that's not going to have a real effect on an intruder response. So for us, when we do a physical security assessment, we look at it from a bad guy's perspective and say, how am I going to defeat every layer that you put in place to try to access your building and actually carry out an attack? So first and foremost, know who's doing that assessment and whether they're truly qualified. Second, don't over-rely on technical or electronic technical solutions. You kind of referred to it earlier. We're looking for a single solution to a complex problem, and it doesn't exist. You've got to look at creating layers of security, because every one of those layers is a deterrent and a potential catch point. And it's where we can identify someone's intentions. Let me give you an example. We have fences around a school, not because somebody can't climb a fence or cut the wire, but that's exactly why we want those around there, because everyone else, how do they enter into the school? They drive through the gate, they park in the parking lot, they enter through the primary door, go through the checkpoints, whatever the case may be. So someone climbing our fence is a clue that this person probably has bad intentions. So there's things like that we're looking for to create those layers. The next one is 3 important components: train staff, train staff, train staff. The best security you can ever have in any school, business, any place that you're trying to increase the level of safety and security within the building is through trained personnel. It's a human being that, once trained and understands what they're looking for, knows how to respond to it. And there's just no other way around it. And I can show you, and I'm going to show you as an example, where a lack of training cost children their lives. And it didn't have to be. It was something very, very simple that we get into. What does that training consist of? First and foremost, awareness. I know that's the buzzword anymore, but you would be surprised how people really have no clue what awareness is. How many times do you see people walking down the street with their head down texting? You are at that point unaware of what's going on around you, and what will happen when you finally look up. It may be that person standing in front of you putting a gun in your face saying, "Give me your money." Awareness is such a huge component of this, but also what am I being trained in for that awareness? What am I looking for? What are the traits of an armed person? What are the traits of someone that maybe has pre-incident indicators that we could possibly stop this thing before it ever gets started? So some of the areas that they've got to be trained in are that covers the awareness piece. And then finally, the response protocols. What are we training them on when the incident starts? So part of the training is in the prevention phase, part of the training is in the response phase. So when you think about the response phase, what does that consist of? What response methodology are we using? And see, that's a whole other thing. That could be a whole nother show for you and I, is what's the difference between the 3 outs that we teach and run, hide, fight? They sound very similar, but they're worlds apart. But to the average person, they're all the same, and they do make a difference.
Great points. We went over some of the technical solutions, some of the product-oriented solutions, but you came back to, hey, what really works? And that is training real people. Anything that's based on machines, I mean, machines are inherently stupid. They only do what we tell them to do, but people can react and they can respond, and all the more so when they receive training. And I know the type of training that you specialize in is, part of it, we sit in a classroom and we look at situations, we look at facts, but it's hands-on. You have people experience in a controlled manner the stress of what the actual environment might be like, so that hopefully it won't, but if it does come to pass, people will have some inclination of how they have felt and what they need to do.
Right. I say it all the time in class. The body can't go where the brain's never been. And the failure many times in the training programs is we're never taking the body where the brain where the body needs to go. And that's why for us, we do classrooms. So we're trying to hit every learning style. You have to do the classroom where you have maybe a PowerPoint and you talk about some of the histories And it's not because they need to know necessarily other events. It's because what we learn from those events. When you look at a Columbine, it wasn't just a shooting incident. It was made to be using explosive devices, a much more widespread, chaotic event where they were going to drop the ceiling of the cafeteria on 500 kids. Anyone not killed then would come outside, and they would shoot them from the parking lot near their vehicles. And when the police responded, they were getting a gunfight with the police, and a device in the trunk of each car set to go off at a later time would then blow up and kill anyone around their vehicles. So the problem with a lot of the things that we're talking about, that's why you teach the historical incidents so that we learn from the past. But then now you got to tell them, what are we going to do now? And then you need to walk them through that. So that's why we take the staff on a walk through their building so that they understand, if I were in this space, how would I use the 3 outs? What does it look like? How would I lock this door out? How would I barricade, lock, layer, reinforce this space? And then do I have a get out option? Or if I'm in a space that can't be locked out, where are my get out options, so that I already know that if he comes from that direction, I'm going to go that direction and direct students. And then from each of those locations, how would I take out? What are the improvised weapons that I could use in or around me to become more effective in the fight that I have? And then finally pulling it all together by putting them through scenarios, again, crawl, walk, run, so that they understand. And it creates a team building environment, because the most anxiety from discussing these things, that's why the fear is there. It's not because they're afraid of the subject. It's because every time it's ever been brought up, no one's given them a possible solution. When you can give someone a solution to that particular problem, the anxiety level goes down. And that's why we've had such good success, is because while it can be a little scary, we understand that. So we're very sensitive to the people that we're dealing with, so that we don't have to push them over the edge. We've just got to kind of walk them to that edge and say, see how far down that is? That's why we don't just jump over the edge. So it's getting them to that point where they can understand it and then respond to it. And I look at the different response protocols, and I really try not to discuss negatively any of them, but more importantly, discuss the advantages versus disadvantages. The human brain in a crisis can only remember typically 3 variables of information, 3 to 7. So when you have a response protocol that's 7 steps, how many of those are they going to remember? So for us, that's why we knew it needed to be principally based. It needed to be very easy to remember in 3 steps, but we also wanted something that the words were more offensive rather than defensive, so that they could pre-plan what those responses look like.
Train. Talk about threats, risks, and that's what brings solutions. I want to, Mark, to cite a comment here from Julie Dahlberg. She says, yes, training the staff completely, including substitutes, volunteers, and janitorial staff. Are some staff sometimes left out of this training?
Absolutely. Julie, I cannot agree with you more, and thank you for that comment. Early on in 2008, when we started our programs with the contract in the state of Missouri, it never failed. When I got people involved in that class, and I would say, okay, teachers and staff, what's your response? But when you asked the janitorial staff, you said, what's your job in a lockdown? Literally, they shrugged their shoulders. When you ask a principal, what's your job in a lockdown? Well, my job is to walk the hallways to make sure everyone's locked down. Well, that's very admirable, but what do you carry? Well, I carry a cell phone, I carry a radio. Yes, what else do you carry? Finally, you get them to think about it to the level that I carry a key. I carry a master key. So does the custodial staff. I carry a master key, and if I don't lock myself down, if I'm the first victim, which happened in Sandy Hook, it was the principal that was one of the first victims, and you take the keys, they now have a master key to violate or penetrate every single classroom, getting access to every single child. You failed your lockdown. So we believe that everyone has to be trained. Cooking staff, the cafeteria staff, because if you think about it from the standpoint of lunchtime, those particular people are going to be involved in the response phase. They are going to have to know, where do I direct students to do that in the cafeteria, and where do they go from here? So everyone does have to be trained to the same level. Now, when you take that even further, what does the training look like for each one of those groups? It may be somewhat different. But to me, you look at custodial staff, they're all over the school at any given point of the day. They are some of the greatest eyes you can have. That's the best security cameras you can have, because you can't tell where they're going to be, right? So when you think about the idea of, we're spending all of this money to put cameras in schools, but there's nobody watching the cameras. And if you did have somebody watching the cameras, what response capability do they have? Are they armed? Have they been trained? How long is it still going to take them to get from where the cameras are viewed to where the location of the threat is? So that's why for us, training personnel has to be the primary thing done to enhance the level of security in any facility.
Yeah, you're talking about investing in people, protecting people.
Absolutely.
Training, and some of these other items can be a part of that solution. But if no one's trained to know how to lock or barricade the door, it doesn't matter if you have a locking mechanism that's cutting edge, state of the art, laser powered, solar powered. If no one knows how to use it or what to do, then you're in trouble.
Let's look at it another way and just kind of build on that thought. If we have not trained our staff, but we've put all of this technology in place. We've got the alarms, we've got camera systems, we've got all the metal detectors, we've got all of these things in place, but not trained anybody. They start going off. What does it still look like? Nobody responds because they've never been trained to respond. But on the converse side, if you train everybody on what a proper response looks like, what awareness is, how to approach that person that may be exhibiting these pre-attack indicators and de-escalate the situation, all of those other things that we add to our security layers are force multipliers. They enhance our response capabilities because it only makes us better. But without training, those things really don't matter to us, because most people will say, well, that's somebody else's job. Somebody else is supposed to respond to that camera or to that alarm. And that's just not the fact. So, the big argument after Sandy Hook was metal detectors. Well, we need to have metal detectors in every single school. Well, one, every school doesn't necessarily need a metal detector. What's the culture? What's the community want? All of that's got to have a say in that as well. And typically you go to any school that has metal detectors, who's running them? It's typically an unarmed, uniformed person that has a very low level of training and has no response capability. So all you're doing with a metal detector is changing the point of the initial attack. It either is that point where he kills the person operating the metal detector, or it starts outside and carries inside. So one solution just doesn't work, and it's not just an electronic solution or a technical solution absent training of personnel.
So as this has stirred more questions for you, or desire to bring resolution to a problem in your school, your church, or your business, get in touch with Mark, get in touch with Strategos. Mark, one last question regarding training. Recently, in the last few weeks, in the Midwest, there was an active shooter training for teachers, and the company, not Strategos, used BB guns. And there was a great consternation, welts. I mean, nobody was seriously injured, but, people got shot up with BBs, and that hurts. It made worldwide news. Should anyone use BB guns for active shooter training?
Okay. I really have to kind of bite my tongue on this one, Roy, because as a 27-year police veteran, I feel like I do have somewhat of a right to talk about police officers and what we do and how we do it. They were wrong. I did an instructor class last week in Indiana, the state that this occurred in. And when I read this, I want to hit my head against the wall. Police, when you bring police in to train teachers, faculty, and staff, and I'm not saying 100% of the time by any means, there are great trainers out there. But typically the first problem with a police trainer is he solves every problem with a gun. The reason I say that is when I train police officers to train teachers, first thing I have to do to them is on day one say, okay, this week you no longer have your belt with all that, the bat belt with all the equipment on it. You no longer have the knowledge that you would normally have. Now you are a teacher sitting behind a desk, and you're in that gap from 0 minutes when it starts to 5 minutes when the police arrive. So what are you going to do to now solve that problem? And when you remove their equipment from them, many times they don't know what to do. So when we developed our ACERT training, the active shooter intruder response train the trainer course, it was because of a very similar circumstance here in our own state. On the other side of the state from us, an entity, after Senate Bill 75 was made into law, and now every school in the state of Missouri has to have a drill conducted by a Missouri certified, post-certified police officer. So local schools were going to the police officers to get this drill done. Well, they were also getting training. And it was a very similar circumstance. They were going to start shooting teachers with force-on-force equipment. As a police officer, yes, we have to do training where force-on-force is involved. In other words, where I'm going to get shot by a projectile that hurts. But when I'm training teachers, like they did in Indiana, to not tell them what was going to happen, to bring them into a room, line them up 4 at a time with their hands on their head and shoot them in the back, that's bad training. In fact, what it does is it creates an even worse problem, because now there's a huge distrust between that school district and the police. What should have probably happened is they probably should have wound up hopefully going against someone, hopefully that we trained, that if you put them on their knees, they're going to grab a stapler and turn around and throw it at your head and bean you with it. To show, because the police officer's point was, we want the mentality that you'll never do this again. Well, we want the same mentality, but we do it a different way in our training, and we never have to shoot a teacher with any projectile that hurts. They don't need that. That's not what they need. The other mistake that's typically made when I find out that a school is going to have police officers training the teachers is, I say, oh, really? What are you going to teach them? Well, we're going to do a scenario, and we're going to come in and take care of the problem and let them watch. That's not what a teacher needs, because they're the true first responder. That gap in time from when it starts until the police get there, that's what they need to know to do. How do I prevent any further loss of life, or how do I mitigate the circumstance to lessen the overall impact? And I'll give you a point going back to training, Roy, because I told you I was going to hit on this. Parkland, Florida, since 1999, and when Columbine occurred, schools implemented lockdown policies. And those lockdown policies pretty much were written to say, close and lock your door, turn the lights off, move to the safe area room and take roll call. Move to the safe area of the room and take roll call. That's been going on in schools since 1999. If you go back and review Parkland, Florida, the biggest majority of those kids that were killed and injured were shot in direct view of the door. Why weren't they moved to the safe area of the room? What we consider the safe wall. It shows a complete lack of training by that school district. And as far as I'm concerned, people should be held liable. And I believe that there should be some civil lawsuits filed for parents that lost their children on that school district because they failed to train their teachers in what they should properly be doing. And they had training. And you know what? The trainer recommended, this is the safe wall. This is where you need to move your students. How do I know that they had that? Because it was covered in the final report that many teachers had even gone to the effort of taping off the area that they needed to move their students behind. So some got it, but others didn't. Why? It was a fact. It was a failure of leadership in that school district because they had I guarantee you they had the idea it'll never happen here. And to me, it's inexcusable. There's no reason that should have ever happened. That just drives me crazy that I can prove that kids lost their life because teachers weren't properly trained. And then add to that, you and I talked about the fact that one district took the initiative to go get river rock and put them in buckets in the classroom. And people across the nation laughed. I'll tell you what, that was a better response and a better plan if the teachers are properly trained how to direct their students. Hey, grab a river rock. If he comes through that door, we're gonna bomb him with those river rocks. And let me put it into an example. There are still countries where people are killed by stoning. So people can laugh all they want, but I got news for you. Go in as a bad guy and get stoned in the doorway, and it's going to have a result. So to me, it was not a bad idea. I just hope the training went with it so those teachers know what they need to do with those river rock and how to direct students to do it. 30 people making a decision in a classroom that if he comes through that door is a lot faster than one suspect at the door making 30 decisions. Who do I shoot first? While those rocks are coming at his head. For me, it was a great solution and it was very cost effective.
It couldn't possibly be said any better than you've already put it. Training rules the day. Technology, solutions, backpacks, bulletin boards, panic alarms, locking mechanisms, they all have their place, but it all has to start with training. And speaking of training, we got a lot of great comments from everybody. Tried to acknowledge them here, and we will definitely follow up. I want to share one from Rich Franklin. Says, as a Strategos trained trainer, I so appreciate the rational, balanced perspective that you bring to all these issues. Oversimplification is never the answer.
And Rich is a superintendent. So he's in a place and a position of authority. And I know that the people that he is assigned, that school is a very, very well protected and safe school. It's good to have you here, Rich.
Well, we really appreciate the comments, participation of everyone. If you've found this valuable, we would be delighted if you share it with others. And you can reach Mark or anyone on the Strategos team at strategosintl.com, or you can message us directly here through Facebook. Mark, any final words? We appreciate everyone who's stayed in live or watches us later.
Just thank everyone again. And if anything comes out of this at all, please, it's just the idea that training, and it's got to be quality training. If we truly want to make a difference and save lives, that's the only way to do it. Train people, invest in your people.